Right, begin. Welcome to another episode of Sounds Reasonable. I'm your host, Dr. Brad, and I'm joined in the production of our weekly show by Tim, Tracy, and Abby. We're all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts, a pervasive belief in a divine skydad, an insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you are now listening to the cure for these ailments. Sounds Reasonable. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after every episode by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors, but we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. We'll now move on to our science news segment, and remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. There are 10 times as many bacterial cells in our body than our own cells. This fact usually astounds most lay people. These bacterial cells are essential to the functioning of our digestive and immune systems. The subject of our science news segment this week is the fascinating discovery that bacterial cells also play a key role in the functioning of our brains. Tim has the story, so Tim, tell us all about it.
Thanks for the introduction, Dr. Brad. So today my story comes to us from Nature on February 3rd, written by Cassandra Willard, and is titled, How Gut Microbes Could Drive Brain Disorders. Scientists are starting to work out how the gut microbiome can affect brain health, which could lead to better and easier treatments for brain diseases. In 2006, soon after she launched her own laboratory, neuroscientist Jane Foster discovered something she felt sure would set her field abuzz. She and her team were working with two groups of mice, one with a healthy selection of microorganisms in their gut and one that lacked a microbiome. They noticed that the mice would, without gut bacteria, seem less anxious than their healthy equivalents. When placed in a maze with some open paths and some walled-in ones, they preferred the open paths. The bacteria in the gut seemed to be influencing their brain and behavior. Dr. Foster at McMaster University in Hamilton, Canada, wrote up the study and submitted it for publication. It was rejected. She wrote it up and sent it out again rejected. Quote, people didn't buy it. They thought it was an artifact, she says. Finally, after 3 years and 7 submissions, she got an acceptance letter. Now, John Cryan, a neuroscientist at the University College Cork in Ireland, joined the field about the same time as Dr. Foster did, and knows exactly how she felt. When he began talking about the connections between bacteria living in the gut and the brain, quote, "I felt very evangelical," he says. He recalls one Alzheimer's disease conference at which he presented in 2014, quote, "I've never given a talk in a room where there was less interest," unquote. Today, however, the gut-brain axis is a feature at major neuroscience meetings, and Cryan says he is no longer, quote, "this crazy guy from Ireland." Thousands of publications over the past decade have revealed that the trillions of bacteria in the gut could have profound effects on the brain and might be tied to a whole host of disorders. So there's been an explosion of interest in the microbe gut brain connection, but along with the explosion of interest has come hype. Some gut brain researchers claim or imply causal relationships when many studies show only correlations, and shaky ones at that. Says Maureen O'Malley, a philosopher at the University of Sydney in Australia who studies the field of microbiome research. Quote, "Have you found an actual cause, or have you just found another effect?" In recent years, however, the field has made significant strides, O'Malley says. Rather than talking about the microbiome as a whole, some research teams have begun drilling down to identify specific microbes, mapping out the complex and sometimes surprising pathways that connect them to the brain. Studies in mice and in some preliminary work in humans suggest that microbes can trigger or alter the course of conditions such as Parkinson's disease, autism spectrum disorder, and more. Therapies aimed at tweaking the microbiome could help to prevent or treat these diseases, an idea that some researchers and companies are already testing in human clinical trials. The prospects of new therapies for some of these intractable brain disorders or diseases is exciting, says Sarkis Magzmaniam, microbiologist at the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, particularly given how much easier it is to manipulate the gut than the brain. Getting therapies into the brain has been a long-standing challenge, he says, but you can sure as hell change the microbiome. So triangling the transmission here is the next section. In 1817, little history here, in 1817, English surgeon James Parkinson described some of the first cases of the, quote, shaking palsy, that would come to be known as Parkinson's disease. One individual had developed a numbness and a prickling sensation in both arms. Parkinson noticed that the man's abdomen seemed to contain considerable, quote, considerable accumulation. He dosed the man with a laxative, and 10 days later, his bowels were empty and his symptoms were gone. Parkinson might have been onto something. Some people who developed the disease experienced constipation long before they developed mobility problems. And many researchers have embraced the idea that the disease begins in the gut, at least in some cases. To understand the idea, it is useful to know a little bit about the disease. The hallmark symptoms of Parkinson's, tremors, stiffness, and slowness of movement, appear as the neurons responsible for coordinating motion begin to die. Why these neurons die isn't fully understood, but a protein known as alpha-synuclein seems to have a key role. In people with Parkinson's disease, the protein misfolds. The first misfolded protein causes more to misfold until harmful clumps known as Lewy bodies begin to form in the brain. When I was reading that, it kind of reminded me of some things going on with prions.
Yes.
And the misfolding that occurs. What triggers this cascade is the question. In 2015, Robert Fireland, a neurologist at the University of Louisville in Kentucky, proposed a new theory. He had read that the gut bacteria can produce proteins that have similar structure to the misshapen alpha synuclein proteins. So he proposed that the bacterial proteins might be providing a template for misfolding. And he and his colleagues fed rats a particular strain of Escherichia coli that produces one of these clumping proteins called curly in the gut. They saw more alpha synuclein accumulation in the animal's brain. Work published last year by Mazamanian and his team supports Friedland's hypothesis. Quote, "It is not clear how the signal in the gut reaches the brain, but one likely conduit is the vagus nerve. The vagus connects the brain to many organs, including the colon, making it the longest of the 12 cranial nerves that carry signals between the brain and the rest of the body. Quote, it's really a highway, science says, and research in humans and animals suggests that it is a crucial role, it has a crucial role in ferrying at least some messages between the gut and the brain. In the 1970s, a common therapy for stomach ulcers was to remove all or part of the nerve to curb acid production in the stomach. But in recent decades, researchers noticed a strange side effect. People who had undergone this procedure seemed to be less susceptible to Parkinson's disease. In a study in mice, injecting misfolded alpha synuclein into the gut produced it in the brain. But if researchers first removed the vagus nerve, no alpha synuclein appeared in the brain. The injected alpha synuclein itself seemed to stay in the gut, but Valena Dawson, a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, who was an author on the study, thinks that there might be a domino effect. Misfolded proteins transmit the air up the vagus nerve until proteins in the brain eventually misfold. Mazamanian and his colleagues are now conducting experiments to see whether the curly protein in the gut can still prompt Parkinson's syndrome in mice that have the vagus nerve severed. Because misfolded proteins are a hallmark of several other conditions that affect the brain, including Alzheimer's disease and motor neuron disease, the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, Friedland says that the bacterial proteins could be implicated in these diseases as well. Dawson finds the idea plausible, but says the bacterial amyloids aren't the only factors to consider. Parkinson's, for example, is a complex disease that presents differently in different people. Still, she says this could be one way to get things started. Proponents of the gut-brain link say that the microbiome could do more than just trigger some cases of the neurodegenerative disease. It could also have effects on its severity. Scientists at the German Cancer Research Center in Heidelberg were struck by the differences in how ALS can develop. Some people with the disease progress slowly, others deteriorate rapidly. They wondered whether the microbiome helps to explain those differences. So they began working with one of the most common ALS mouse models. When they wiped out the microbiome with antibiotics or used mice that lacked a microbiome from birth, they saw a much more rapid progression of the disease than in mice with a normal microbiome. The team compared gut bacteria in ALS mice with those of their healthy littermates and found several microbial species that seemed to be linked to the disease. They painstakingly transplanted those species one by one into another group of mice without any gut bacteria, identifying two species that made ALS symptoms worse and one that seemed to make them better. They wondered, quote, how does this strain that only lives in the gut impact so amazingly a disease which is focused in the brain? The culprits could be bacterial metabolites, small molecules produced by bacteria that can enter the bloodstream and travel around the body. At least half of all small molecules in the blood are, quote, either made by microbes or modulated by microbes. When they analyzed the metabolites produced by the beneficial microbe and administered one of them, a molecule called nicotinamide, also known as vitamin B3, to mice prone to ALS, they found that the molecule entered the brain and improved their symptoms. When they compared the microbiomes of people with ALS and those when they compared the microbiomes of people with ALS and those of their unaffected family members, they saw less nicotinamide in the individuals with ALS. At least one group has already tested vitamin B3 as a treatment for ALS in a small trial, albeit a version combined with another compound. They administered it to participants with ALS for 4 months. Those in the treatment group showed some improvement, but nearly all of the people in the placebo group declined in health. Many more bacterial and metabolites exist, and every cell in the body is open to their effects. Once you realize that, you start understanding that the effects of the microbiome could expand well beyond where the microbiomes actually live. The effects could even pass from one generation to the next. Take autism spectrum disorder, ASD. The cause is still poorly understood, but infections in mothers during pregnancy seem to increase the risk of ASD in her child, according to epidemiological studies. For example, a Swedish cohort of nearly 1.8 million people, those whose mothers had been hospitalized for an infection during pregnancy, had a 79% higher risk of being diagnosed with ASD.
Wow.
Research in mice also supports the link. To mimic an infection, researchers infected pregnant mice with double-stranded RNA, which the body sees as a viral invader. The pups exhibited more repetitive behaviors and anxiety than do those born to mothers who weren't infected, and interact less with other mice. Symptoms that mirror those of people with ASD. Gloria Cho, a neuroscientist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Picower Institute for Learning and Memory in Cambridge, and her husband, co-collaborator, Jun Hu, an immunologist at Harvard Medical School in Boston, wanted to know why. They zeroed in on a type of cell that defends against bacteria and fungi by producing molecules called cytokines. When Cho and Hu mimicked an infection in their mice, these cells, called T helper 17 cells, became hyperactive, churning out a particular type of cytokine called interleukin 17. This molecule travels into the brains of the developing pups, probably through the placenta, and then bound to brain receptors. This seems to have a profound effect on the animals. The researchers found that the adult offspring often showed increased neural activity, which caused their autism-like behaviors. But, quote, not every pregnant woman who is infected or hospitalized during pregnancy necessarily has children with neurodevelopmental disorders or autism, Hugh says. There must be something tipping the mother's immune system towards this overactive state. Cho and Hugh focused on a collection of long, thin gut microbes known as segmented filamentous bacteria, which had previously been shown to promote the formation of T helper 17 cells. When they treated pregnant mice with an antibiotic to kill these bacteria and then stimulated an immune system response, the pups didn't develop any behavioral differences. Cho and Hugh, keen on whether the coronavirus pandemic could lead to an increased risk of ASD, are collecting samples from pregnant women who are infected with the SARS-CoV-2 and cataloging the bacteria in their guts and the levels of interleukin 17 in their blood. Given that the coronavirus, like any other infection, activates the mother's immune system, it is plausible that the SARS-CoV-2 could increase the risk of altered brain development and potentially psychiatric disorders, says Dr. David Amaro. who studies ASD at the University of California, Davis. Researchers have not yet found evidence to support this theory. Muriel Costa Mattoli, a neurobiologist at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, is also studying the relationship between bacteria and ASD. But rather than looking at the microbes that causes the disorder, he has found one that might treat its symptoms. He stumbled on this bacteria by accident about 5 years ago. At the time, he was working on mice with offspring that have autism-like symptoms. When those mice were housed with neurotypical ones and ate their excrement, their ASD-like behaviors disappeared. He and his colleagues worked out that the affected mice were missing a particular species of bacterium, the Lactobacillus reuteri, and they tested the L. reuteri in several other mice models, and the bacterium was able to reverse some of the ASD-like behaviors in every one. And just as with the Parkinson's work, the researchers could block the effect in mice if they severed the vagus nerve 13. Exactly what type of signaling L. reuteri sends isn't yet known. The team has found that some of the strains can reverse the behavior while others cannot. And the researchers are now working to discover which of its genes are involved. If they find the gene that produces a key metabolite, quote, we can just put it in any bacteria and now we may have a potential treatment. That strategy is yet to be tested. One group in Italy is already trying the L. reuteri as a therapy in 80 children with ASD. Participants will take the bacteria or a placebo tablet for 6 months and have their symptoms monitored. So they're hoping to launch open trials soon with this. Gut microbes may even influence how the brain recovers after injury. Connie Benakis, a neurobiologist, Institute of Stroke and Dementia Research in Ludwig Maximilians, University of Munich in Germany, and her colleagues treat mice with antibiotics to wipe out some of their gut bacteria before inducing a stroke. They found that the antibiotics could reduce severity of brain damage. In each of these diseases, many mechanistic questions remain. Researchers in the field acknowledge that there have yet to flesh out the pathways from microbe to brain. And the trickiest step will be validating these animal findings in humans and moving into trials. John Cryan has watched the data pile up since his talk on the subject was met with stone silence. He finds the mounting evidence convincing and sees enormous promise in the microbiome-based therapies. Quote, unlike your genome, which you can't do much about except blame your parents and grandparents, your microbiome is potentially modifiable, and that gives great agencies to patients, he says. I quote, that's really exciting. Well, long story short, I'm done. So what do you guys think about the possibilities of this microbiota connection to neurological diseases?
I think it's pretty interesting. Do you mind if I share my screen to show a figure that would kind of help the idea, I guess?
Go ahead, Abby.
That would be great.
Yeah.
So a couple years ago for one of my grad classes, I did a project or like little research project over this idea, and I was focusing on anxiety, and it kind of stimulated from a friend of mine who was convinced that taking probiotics helped decrease her anxiety. And like a lot of people, especially mothers our age, my age, experience anxiety. So I started looking at it because I thought, yeah, that's BS, honestly. Like that's what my first idea was like, how does that have anything to do with anxiety? Like you're taking, probiotics. And so I actually found a decent amount of research that supports that idea that taking certain probiotics or having certain gut bacteria does decrease anxiety. Of course, a lot of it is surveys or data that's not like physiological. So it's hard to really put those things together. And then they have done quite a bit of research with mice. And so that's where we see a lot of that research, the physiological research looking at the pathways. So, like Tim had mentioned, this pathway is the vagus nerve, which basically sends signals from your brain to your gut and your gut back to your brain. So it's a pathway that goes both ways. And this particular figure is from a review, and you can see it's cited from Westphal in 2017. So his review kind of basically took a lot of different research and then tried to figure out what bacteria are responsible for these pathways. So we're looking at these probiotics, which are just basically good bacteria. And then you can see that there are different bacteria that are going to form different metabolites, basically, that are going to enter your bloodstream. And then send different signals through this vagus nerve. And then what they saw with the research that they looked at, so again, this is a review, is that some of these pathways led to these neurodegenerative diseases that Tim had mentioned. So symptoms of like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, dementia, things like that. So I know this is kind of a lot. There's a lot of acronyms here that kind of are looking at both genetic, in a way, like turning on and turning off different genes, and then also looking at different signaling molecules that are in your body to signal certain responses by your brain. So anyways, I thought that was pretty interesting. And then it does show, as far as some of these bacteria in mice, a decrease in anxiety. And so there was another study done that I looked at that looked at specifically mice, and it showed, looking at placebos and these probiotics, that it does help with anxiety and makes the mice basically want to explore more, be more comfortable in like a maze, kind of the things that Tim was talking about in his study. But it was a pretty small study. And then the other study I looked at was looking at pregnant women. And this is a pretty big study. And it was looking at postpartum depression. And so how this specific bacteria, if they took it during pregnancy, they reported less severe postpartum depression after. So, I mean, I think there is quite a bit of research right now that kind of links this idea that certain bacteria are in somewhat control of brain signaling. So I just thought that was pretty interesting overall. And again, this is something that, to begin with, you kind of think, I mean, as a skeptical person, like, yeah, it's just like anything. Like, you take probiotics, you feel better, whatever, that's BS. But I think there's really something to it, because there's been so much research done. It's really providing a lot of evidence that something's going on here. Again, Tim had mentioned that it's not clear really where it's affecting or what's specifically being done. But there's a lot of evidence piling up behind this being a promising treatment for a lot of disorders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really interesting. I'm sending all this to my doctor. Like all of it.
To help you?
Yeah.
To help you.
I'm gonna need that slide, Abby. If you could just send that to me.
Yeah, I can share that with the group. It was just
I almost took a picture of it, but I didn't want to get made fun of because I don't know how to make a screenshot.
I'll just share my presentation. This was a couple years ago. Most of the research was between like 2014 and 2018 that I looked at. And so obviously Tim's is probably a little bit more current. And then, we're still seeing
Yeah,
similar things though. So that's promising.
right. All of it. It's fascinating.
I can't believe your doctor isn't a weekly viewer of our show, Tracy.
I know, right?
Yes.
What's wrong with them?
What
Oh.
strikes me whenever I see this stuff is the tremendous prominence of lactobacillus species.
Isn't that amazing?
They're involved in every single one of those.
Yes.
Now,
Eat
if
your
I
yogurt.
remember, you guys, Tim, you probably are more versed on this than me, but isn't lactobacillus involved in the digestion of milk?
Yeah, right. And of course, it's in yogurt. That's one of the species
Right.
very prominent in yogurt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So dairy
yogurt,
products
milk.
in general. So another interesting aspect would be is milk consumption or dairy product consumption tied in here since lactobacillus species are so highly involved.
Right.
And one other thing, and then we spent a fair amount of time here, so we'll have to move on. But when you initially started, Tim, you pointed out that there was a great deal of skepticism and nobody they could not get their research published. Well, they shouldn't feel too bad because a couple of guys by the name of Dreyer and Bennett back in 1965 proposed that antibodies were produced by by genes that had to be brought together, and they were literally laughed out of the National Academy of Sciences for that. And later on, of course, now their material is dogma.
Right. Yeah.
So
There's countless examples of that.
It's good that they were not discouraged and continued on. And the other thing, also immunology related, is B cells were initially described in chickens, and the discovery of B cells was written up in the wonderful journal known as Poultry Science. So you never know where the next big discovery is going to come from. Well, Tim, thanks. Tim and Abby, thanks so much for putting that together, and we'll be right back with more Sounds Reasonable.
All alive. The devil's in the detail, lingered inside. Oh, a holy crime. But how can I hide you without an alibi? It's a lover's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence. I can't wait no longer. I'm playing with the monsters. Everything that brought me alive. Going wrong like nonsense. Playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a lover's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence without an alibi.
And we're back on Sunday, February 21st. Hey, only 4 weeks to spring.
Hey.
Awesome. Oh, wow. It's been a long winter for everyone in Nebraska and other parts for that matter. But anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
we all have the events of January 6th, the Capitol riots, fresh in our mind. These events were so horrifying and frightening that one would think that no one would be anxious to see them repeated. However, a recent survey by the American Enterprise Institute is suggesting otherwise.
Animals.
Abby has this shocking story. So Abby, should we be on the lookout for more violence soon?
I'm sad to say yes. I think this is going to be something that we're going to see more and more of. And the story is from NPR, so I'm a big NPR fan, and it says a scary survey, the one that Dr. Brad was talking about. 4 in 10 Republicans say political violence may be necessary. So not just more common, but actually necessary to support their conservative propaganda. So this was from February 11th on Morning Edition. And the story goes, the mob that attacked the US Capitol may have been a fringe group of extremists, but politically motivated violence has the support of a significant share of the US public, according to this survey. The survey found that nearly 3 in 10 Americans, 39% of Republicans, agreed that if elected leaders will not protect America, the people must do it themselves, even if it requires violent actions. That result was a really dramatic finding, says Daniel Cox, director of the AEI Survey Center on American Life. I think anytime you have a significant number of the public saying the use of force can be justified in our political system, that's pretty scary. The survey found stark divisions between Republicans and Democrats on the 2020 presidential election, with 2 out of 3 Republicans saying President Biden was not legitimately elected, while 98% of Democrats and 73% of independents acknowledged Biden's victory. The level of distrust among Republicans evident in the survey was such that about 8 in 10 said the current political system is stacked against conservatives and people with traditional values. A majority agreed with the statement, the traditional American way of life is disappearing so fast that we may have to use force to save it. The survey found that to be a minority sentiment. 2 out of 3 Americans overall rejected the use of violence in pursuit of political ends. And Cox emphasized that the finding reflected attitudes and beliefs rather than a disposition to do something. If I believe something, I may act on it and I may not, Cox says. We shouldn't run out and say, oh my goodness, 40% of Republicans are going to attack the Capitol. But under the right circumstances, if you have this worldview, then you are more inclined to act in a certain way if you are presented with that option. The AEI survey found that partisan divisions were also evident along religious lines. About 3 in 5 white evangelicals told the pollsters that Biden was not legitimately elected and that it was not accurate to say former President Donald Trump encouraged the attack on the Capitol, and that a Biden presidency has them feeling disappointed, angry, or frightened. On all those questions, Cox says white evangelicals are politically quite distinct. Majorities of white mainline Protestants, Black Protestants, Catholics, followers of non-Christian religions, and the religiously unaffiliated all viewed Biden's victory as legitimate. The AEI survey found that white evangelicals were especially prone to subscribe to the QAnon movement. 27% said it was mostly or completely accurate to say Trump has been secretly fighting a group of child sex traffickers that include prominent Democrats and Hollywood elites. That share was higher than for any other faith group and more than double the support for QAnon beliefs evident among Black Protestants, Hispanic Catholics, and non-Christians. As with a lot of questions in the survey, white evangelicals stand out in terms of their belief in conspiracy theories and the idea that violence can be necessary. Cox says they're far more likely to embrace all these different conspiracies. The survey also found that considerable cleavages among Americans with respect to pride in their national identity. About 6 in 10 said they are proud to be an American, but the finding varied along generational and race lines, with significantly lower levels of national pride among younger and non-white people. And this survey was conducted between January 21st and January 30th. So the end of January is when this data was compiled. So a lot to go there, and I know Tracy has a lot of good stuff about the QAnon conspiracies. So maybe she has something to say about it being
Totally legitimate organization.
Yeah. Probably
My favorite one.
Antifa as well. Is that no? That's the opposite.
Antifa. That's my second favorite.
All these things right.
If I didn't think the guy across the street would lose it, like completely lose it, I would put a BLM flag in front of my yard because that's.
I don't know if you've looked around your neighborhoods, but I've still got 2 houses that I drive by every day that one has just one Trump flag up, but another has at least 3. And of course, have wonderful messages on them.
Yeah. Well, here we've got spotlights and flags and fences with big locks on them, and
But,
pleasant. Billboards. We've got 3 or 4 billboards.
Billboards.
Yeah, billboards. Trump country. You're in Trump country, it says.
That's interesting that somebody would continue to pay for a billboard after this. But
you're in Trump country. Yeah.
But, go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
I'm trying to remember. There's the barn. There's a barn either between. No, I don't think it's between Lincoln and Omaha. I think it's west of Lincoln.
Yeah.
On the interstate. And every time I drive by that, I just think, man, I would like to torch that thing. But,
right, I know. It makes you want to vandalize. It makes you want to be a vandal.
but it's still up. It might be between Lincoln and Omaha, but it's still there. It's still.
It's crazy, but yeah, Abby, you're right. QAnon is it's like a big rabbit hole of rabbit holes of rabbit holes. It's like imagine a big rabbit hole with a big rabbit hole and a rabbit hole and it's just.
I think the only maybe I don't know shining hope is that it's so fragmented now, the Republican Party, that the percentage of people that maybe are identifying as Republicans isn't it now lower, like in the low 30%?
Yeah, it's below. It's below. I think it's below independence.
Yes. Yes.
You're down to the craziest people, though.
Yeah, exactly. And that of course is the huge danger is
right.
When you distill off the moderates, you're left with the nuts. That's unfortunately I think is where it's at. Now,
right.
The next date that I'm concerned about is March 4th.
Right.
Now, have you been following that? You know why March 4th is of concern? Tim said yes. I'm assuming he knows.
That's the real inauguration day, right?
Well, that's the original inauguration day back when presidents were white men. Real white men.
Or wigs.
But anyway.
I think it's pretty sad that this is happening, but it's sometimes I have a hard time with the percentages, just because those, even though it's a low percentage of people that, total people that actually believe this BS and are pushing it, they seem to be the loudest. And so I don't know how many people they're going to influence. I think that's the scary part for me, is even though before, 10 years ago, I think we wouldn't we wouldn't really be that worried because we'd be like, oh yeah, those are, you know, extremists, no big deal. But they just have such an ability now to indoctrinate people, you know, and just get their views out there. And it's kind of scary that they're really acting upon some of these ideas. And it's that there's no reason, like there's no reasoning. They're basically, the more that you try to uh, bring them some light and say like this, you know, this doesn't make sense, it's just like the more the deeper that they have those beliefs, you know, it's just forcing them to even go deeper. So it's kind of scary to me.
It's definitely scary. I mean, all you have to do is think about how many potential Timothy McVeighs are there out there. You know, because
Right.
only takes one. He killed what, 235 people, I think, with that explosion in Oklahoma City.
Right.
So you know, that's the thing. You know, it doesn't take masses to kill masses, unfortunately. Yeah.
Right.
So it only takes one. And along those lines, they still have not found the individual that planted the pipe bombs at the DNC and RNC headquarters in DC yet. So they're still,
Now I'm sitting here.
still trying to find him. So yeah, I mean, it's nuts. But you know, one last time I have to say it. With the evangelicals, religious beliefs have
consequences. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. So, Abby, thanks so very much for that story.
Yes. Well
And,
done.
stay with us. We will take another short break and be right back with more Sounds Reasonable.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels, they come and go, and they come so easily. Tell me what it is about you that I can't forget, but you're breaking down my walls again just to set me free. Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling?
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable. The damage done by Moscow Mitch McConnell preventing Merrick Garland's nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States is incalculable on many fronts. Unfortunately, science will be one of the areas that is going to suffer the most with the placing of Amy Coney Barrett on the bench. The story I'm going to relay today comes from the Raw story, February 9th of this year, and was written by Nicholas Little. The story is titled, "No Place for Science in the Supreme Court's Christian America." Josh Lyman in The West Wing, so that series that was on TV for a while, described Friday as take out the trash day. On Friday, the fictional White House would release as many of its bad news stories as possible in the knowledge that they would be reported in Saturday's newspapers because, so the thinking went, no one reads Saturday's paper. I'm not sure anyone reads newspapers, period, anymore, unfortunately. But anyway, For the past 4 years under the Trump administration, it seemed like Friday had become Take Away People's Rights Day. Presumably relying on the same lack of media attention, it seemed that week after week, the regime released executive orders damaging to the rights of immigrants, non-believers, and the LGBTQ community, among others, on Friday afternoons. Those of us in the nonprofit legal community started to almost take it personally, seeing our weekend plans canceled time after time to deal with another fire. After the inauguration, we hoped that once again we could, like workers across the country. Thank dog, it was Friday. But late this Friday night, the Supreme Court released its decision in the case of South Bay United Pentecostal Church, oh boy, et al. Versus Newsom, and granted an injunction to religious groups to ignore some of California's restrictions on indoor, in-person religious services imposed by the state in the attempt to control the spread of COVID-19. The decision passed down Friday night by a fractured 6-3 ruling. Gosh, why does 6-3 seem like we're going to hear a lot of coming up? Certain justices voted only to grant exemptions to certain restrictions. Gave us a good view of how the Supreme Court is going to treat religious cases now that a clear majority of Christian supremacists is on the bench following the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the appointment of Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And that view is scary as hell. But the bad news didn't end with just an unconstitutional and unjustifiable preference granted to religion. As Justice Alina Kagan pointed out in dissent, the majority also demonstrates a cavalier dismissal of science. And for all the issues the Center for Inquiry works on, a Supreme Court seemingly committed to the promotion of religion and the relegation of science to an afterthought is a worrying one indeed. 3 sets of restrictions are at stake in the case. California prohibited all indoor religious services in Tier 1 areas, those parts of the state with the highest infection rates. It restricted indoor services in other areas by imposing a cap at 25% of capacity. And it banned singing and chanting in all indoor services. The court voted 6-3 to prevent the enforcement of the ban on indoor services in Tier 1, a designation that covers the majority of the state. Justices Neil Gorsuch, Clarence Thomas, and Samuel Alito would have gone further in their refusal to permit California to protect its citizens from a deadly disease. So for that small mercy, at least, we should be grateful. After this decision, churches are permitted to hold indoor services across the state, regardless of the level of infection, up to 25% of their capacity. While the 25% limit and the ban on singing were permitted to stand, churches were invited to supply evidence that these restrictions were not being enforced equally and were instead being used to restrict churches, not other groups and businesses. The preference for religion here is palpable. While the majority of the court seeks to present these as restrictions that treat religious groups unfairly, while businesses more or less as usual continues for the rest of the state, this ignores the effort to which California has gone to group similar activities together and impose the smallest possible restrictions on each group, especially those involving constitutionally protected activities, consistent with the overarching goal of stopping the spread of the pandemic and saving lives. According to the religious majority on the bench, religious services should be compared with grocery stores and other businesses allowed to remain open at restricted capacity. To these justices, the spread of COVID-19 brought about by selecting your produce is the same as that brought about by praising Jesus. And so differing restrictions are prejudicial to religion. But that's not what California did. The stricter restrictions did not apply solely to religious gatherings. As Justice Kagan's dissent makes clear, alongside religious services, it includes political meetings, an activity also protected by the First Amendment, attendance at lectures, movies, plays, and concerts, and the hospitality industry. There has been no quote unquote picking on religion here, but instead religious activities has been grouped with similar activities based on the types of interactions they generate and the length of time people are exposed to potential infection. This thoughtful determination by California is not just dismissed by the court's majority, it is in effect ignored. And the state is accused of being anti-religious. Despite the slight references to Islamic and Jewish worship, we know it is Christianity that the majority is seeking to defend. But it's not just that the majority of the court ignored California's legitimate efforts to categorize activities based on their potential for harm. It did it by flagrantly dismissing the testimony of scientists, medical experts about this danger. The state provided experts showing how shopping for groceries differed from church services and the amount of infection carrying droplets to which those engaging in the activities were involved, and how employers were in a better position to implement prevention schemes, and the state better positioned to enforce such schemes than churches were. While the pro-religious majority pointed to Hollywood being permitted to record music, while hymns were banned as an example of prejudicial treatment of the faithful, it ignored the requirement by California that film production studios test their employees up to 3 times a week, something unfeasible for a church's congregation. The pandemic has already killed over 460,000 Americans. In fact, I think we're probably going to reach 500,000 this weekend, if not at least by tomorrow. This decision by the Supreme Court makes it likely more will die unnecessarily. We are facing a Supreme Court that will, for the foreseeable future, privilege religion over and above people's rights to health and safety. But also it is a court majority that, despite being made up of justices holding degrees in English literature, political science, and history, holds scientific evidence in contempt when it does not fit its predetermined outcome. That's very, very scary as we move forward in a world of pandemics and climate change. So, guys, your thoughts?
So could they, okay, well, a couple things here. Of course, separation of church and state pops into mind where they're really treading on that.
Always.
The other thing I was thinking, so now could California then say, okay, all right, go ahead and have your meeting, have your service, but then you'll have to self-quarantine for 14 days until we know that no one's infected, or require them to be tested, or monitor that those situations, and then once somebody tests positive, then they quarantine everybody.
Yeah, while that seems like something that could be required, the exact same argument, of course, will be used against that.
Yeah.
So it will. So I just don't see it get anymore.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like ping pong. They're
You're
playing
muted,
ping pong.
Abby.
Oh, I was just saying, like, enforcing those is a big issue. I mean, obviously, I am a teacher, and we are in person. We don't have any online learning opportunities for our students, and nobody's really able to enforce the quarantine. Our school tries, but there's too many that even our local health department says we don't do contact tracing anymore because they don't have the employees, they don't have the ability, they don't have the resources. So I don't see that actually working as a method of control in those situations. And unfortunately, I think that Christianity has been the rule of law for quite a while now, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. And with our addition to the Supreme Court, I think it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, and people don't so much care anymore. It seems like.
Yeah. That's true.
Desensitization. They're desensitized.
Well, yeah, I wish Biden would be more aggressive about this. I know that he's been personally against expanding the court, but we really need to expand it to 13 and add on four justices that actually understand what science is about. Because
Right.
right now, that this is we're potentially heading backwards. I mean, it's a terrible situation. Have all of you seen Brave New World or read the book Brave New World? Or
Maybe.
well, anyway, part of the backstory of it is that the general populace has lost the ability to understand how their machines work. They can work their machines. They know how to push the buttons and pull the levers, so to speak, but they have lost the ability to understand how their machines work. And that is where I honestly see our society heading. We're going to have a society that literally simply does not understand, the very basics of how things work.
Huh.
Ask someone. This would be fun. Just do this. Okay, ask someone how their television works, and I guarantee you, some of them will say, "Well, light is transmitted through the wires."
I can't watch TV if Stan is taking a nap.
That's not,
That's how it works. You get light transmitted through the wires.
yeah.
Yeah. I just say magic. Magic does that.
And radio too. So they'll say, well, sound gets transmitted over, through the air. Well, no, it's not exactly how it's working. So anyway, yeah, just try that sometime.
Where's the food that you're eating come from? That's the same.
The refrigerator.
Yeah, or the store. It's
the store, exactly.
How does the store get it? I don't. Well, they make it, I guess.
Why do you buy organic something?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. It's all organic. I like to tell the kids that, but it's all organic. When we talk about organic molecules, I have that. I actually have them look that up and research the difference, and then because if everything's organic, then why do we have organic food? What does that mean, organically grown?
Propaganda.
Yeah.
So anyway, it can be discouraging, but hopefully there's enough people like us to keep the fight going. So anyway, go ahead.
Hey, real quick, I was listening to an interesting podcast about the Supreme Court, and at the start of the Supreme Court, it was like powerless, and so actually over time, it has gained a lot of power in politics and government to where we are today. So. I don't know, if you guys have time, you should look up like the history of the Supreme Court, and it's really fascinating because I mean, to us, like it seems like a really big deal, these new justices being added. But when the Supreme Court was first put together, it was like, some kind of BS thing that nobody really paid attention to, and
Technicality kind of thing.
Yeah, and they really didn't have very much power at all, and so they've gained power over time slowly to the point where now like they influence everyday life.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we will be right back with our crazy story of the week.
you know? Don't you know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? You were fool's gold. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And we're back with our crazy story of the week. We all know about Trump's big lie that he won the election by a landslide. We also know that he has several supporters trying to spread this propaganda. But who would have ever guessed that a pillow salesman would be one of them? Tracy has our crazy story of the week. So, Tracy, why is Trump unable to get a good night's sleep with a friend like the My Pillow guy?
You know, I always wondered how much sleep Trump really gets. How much sleep do you think he gets? Like 4 hours? I don't know. Anyway, okay, this is from the Huffington Post, HuffPost.com. My Pillow CEO Mike Lindell releases absurd conspiracy infomercial. Far-right network OAN aired the video on repeat. Mike Lindell, the founder of My Pillow and a prominent ally of former President Donald Trump, was suspended from Twitter for promoting election conspiracies. A host on the conservative channel Newsmax recently walked out of an interview as the pillow salesman spouted off lies. Major retailers have begun dropping his product, and lawyers have threatened him with imminent defamation suits over his baseless allegations. But Lindell is still pushing the debunked and dangerous claim that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump, most recently in a 2-hour video that he paid far-right channel One American News Network to air for 12 hours straight on Friday. This was also on February 5th, 2021 is when the story was posted on HuffPost. I should have said that before. The video, called Absolute Truth, which was apparently mistakenly uploaded to YouTube as Absolute Truth. That was probably for QAnon. I'm just saying, that's code.
Yeah, get some code in there.
I've been in there, been deep down in there. Absolute Truth. It's French. It's a 2-hour cavalcade of conspiracies about election fraud featuring delusional claims and discredited guests, such as Rudy Giuliani's nationally mocked witness, Melissa Carone. Did you guys see her? That was great. Gold. I've had a lot of orange juice this morning. Lindell careens through baseless allegations with infomercial pitchman energy, interspersed with stock footage, including arms bearing a hammer and sickle to represent communism. This is an attack not only on those other countries with communism, but they had domestic traitors right here in our country. Whatever is going on right now, we're seeing it. They're suppressing cancel culture. They're trying to cancel us all out. I've seen churches, Christian churches, they're being attacked, Lindell says frantically, as the video cuts between him and an animation of a rubber stamp that says canceled. I love the rubber stamps. Okay. Lindell has become one of the most prominent Trump allies to continue to push the anti-democratic fantasy that President Joe Biden will somehow be removed from office and the 2020 election overturned. March 4th,
March 4th. Yeah, look out.
4th. You there? Before Trump left office, Lindell was photographed entering the White House carrying notes that included a suggestion to invoke martial law. Right-wing media has nevertheless given Lindell an immense platform, promoting his conspiracies to millions of viewers with appearances on Newsmax, OAN, and Fox News top-rated host Tucker Carlson's primetime show. At times, Lindell has proven to be too far removed from reality, or too much of a legal liability for hosts to let him air his views unchallenged. OAN, which has heavily promoted baseless election fraud claims in the past, aired Lindell's video on Friday with a long disclaimer stating that Lindell purchased the airtime and that the channel did not endorse the allegations in the video, which OAN said are not intended to be taken or interpreted by the viewer as established facts. OAN's disclaimer specifically distances the channel from claims Lindell makes about voting systems from Dominion and Smartmatic, two companies which has been at the center of debunked conspiracy theories, alleging they helped rig the election. Smartmatic filed a $2.7 billion defamation suit on Thursday against Fox News, stating that the outlet promoted falsehoods about election fraud that damaged the company and contributed to the riot at the Capitol on January 6th. Dominion has filed similar suits against Trump allies promoting election fraud conspiracy theories, including a damages suit seeking $1.7 billion from Rudy Giuliani. Already, many outlets, including Fox News and Newsmax, have issued on-air statements retracting their coverages of the companies. That was fun to watch, by the way. Dominion lawyers have warned Lindell that a defamation suit against him is imminent, while major retailers such as Bed Bath & Beyond have dropped MyPillow from their stores. Twitter has suspended Lindell from its platform for spreading misinformation, and YouTube removed Lindell's absolute truth video from within hours of its posting, stating that it violated its community guidelines. The absolute truth video was directed by Brannon House, the host of a far-right conspiracy network that has aired numerous baseless and debunked claims about the presidential election. House, Howse, is also named as a researcher for the video, and his son, Logan, is named as a post-editing assistant. Last year, House put out a far-right conspiracy film that was more than 8 hours long, and it claimed that the Islamists, the Marxists, are trying to overthrow our government, our forms of government, and used anti-Semitic tropes as a globalist revolution. House is also co-host of a home decor show with his wife, Melissa. Lindell told a Christian YouTube channel this week that he had made the video over the course of the 5 days while holed up with people guarding me and brought in from all over this country. During this, he has security. During the same appearance, he claimed that Biden's victory was the result of, I just picture like all these pillows, like a, okay, like a padded room with pillows. During the same appearance, he claimed that Biden's victory was the result of an international communist coup that involved the heads of social media platforms. Jack Dorsey, who I'm told is probably going to end up in prison, he had to be part of this. Nobody would do what he did to this country, him and Mark Zuckerberg. Lindell said. Mark Zuckerberg, I'll tell you what. Lindell also claimed without evidence that he was speaking to world leaders and that his video would exonerate Trump ahead of the former president's second impeachment trial, for which I was looking for pillows, for which hang on, exonerate Trump ahead of the former president's second impeachment trial, for which he is accused of using false election fraud claims to incite the insurrection that killed 5 people. Well, I'm going to correct that, where 5 people died at the Capitol this month. I'm going to try to get to the president and show him this, Lindell said. He's going to walk into those hearings and they're going to give him an apology.
Yeah, they sure did.
Ever tried on my pillow? I don't have one,
Oh,
but I don't sleep very well. I was thinking about maybe trying it.
I think they're gonna be cheap now. You can probably get one on sale.
I know, right? Well, I had a conservative friend of mine until he finally left my Facebook page, say that he would send me his because he wasn't a fan. He would pay postage.
Oh,
I think they're pretty
You
expensive.
guys, are they expensive?
Yeah, I've seen them like in the past when they were really popular. And he had all those commercials, and they were at Bed Bath and Beyond, and I think they were like, I don't know, $30 or $40 a pillow.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they are expensive, but
I'm kind of prepared to pay a little bit more than that for a pillow. I'm having like trouble with my neck and shoulder. I'm looking for a good pillow and a
But,
consultant, a political consultant. Now I'm thinking it might be
Weren't
something
they-
to do with my gastrointestinal system. I've been drinking
That's right.
kefir.
eat more yogurt.
I've been drinking kefir. Do you guys drink kefir?
kefir, yeah, I know what it is. I've never actually had it. I do
I've
know
had
it.
but I've never, or I don't drink it on a regular basis.
I always
Never
put it
had it.
on my
No,
pick up grocery list.
with that issue of martial law, I keep wondering. In all seriousness, I mean, I keep wondering if Trump actually listened to him on that, because if the crowd had been successful at eliminating Pence and Pelosi, that would have triggered martial law.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if that, in some way, in Trump's twisted world, if that didn't get into his mind, that, hey, we've got a chance still, to get martial law declared if both Pence and Pelosi get eliminated. And so, I mean, these nut jobs out there.
So the pillow guy just jumped right in?
Well, no, I mean the My Pillow guy, and I had a lot of fun with this when he did this. The My Pillow guy, in essence, had a sleepover at the White House, and so I was, so I was wondering if he and Trump played hide the pillow.
I was picturing a pillow fight. Weirdo.
That's
Well, I
Well,
may
that-
have had
What is that?
a pillow fight too, but
they probably reenacted that scene from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles when they woke up. Because where's your other hand?
not
Between
pillows.
two puppy pillows. Those
Yeah.
are pillows.
Those aren't pillows.
That's not
You guys
it's not a
haven't seen
pillow.
that. Those are not pillows.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, in Trump's wacky world, who knows what type of ideas could have gotten into his head. And
It's all that Adderall. I bet he doesn't sleep well.
with Lindell bringing that up, it wouldn't surprise me if that's managed to spark some of his motivation to do what he did. But
He's probably very prone to infomercials too.
Maybe
Yeah.
this will lead to a required mental evaluation for all politicians, anybody running for office. because man, we've got some nuts out there
Yeah, absolutely.
that needed
Yeah, no question about it.
some evaluation.
I think sane people don't want to be in politics, though, so there's an issue there.
That's,
Right.
there wouldn't be anybody nobody to run for office. Is that what you're trying to
Oh.
say? Oh,
Well, Tracy, thanks so much for that story. And that'll wrap us up for this week. If you enjoyed our program, please pass the word to your
Already?
friends and associates. Yep, already. Believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page. Remember, there is a big difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Abby, Tracy, and Tim saying so long.
yeah.